Yesterday, and I mean yesterday, as in the last 24 hours, satellite imagery analysts at Planet Labs and the Middlebury Institute released updated imagery of a site in the Zagros mountain range in western Iran that stopped people cold, not because of what the imagery showed being destroyed, because of what it showed still standing, a reinforced tunnel entrance carved into the face of a mountain at least 250 meters below the surface, surrounded by blast deflectors, access roads, and what analysts identified as ventilation stacks, all of it intact, all of it operational. Hold on to that image. A mountain with missiles buried inside it, 250 meters down, fully functional. Because on the same day that imagery was published, senior American officials were briefing Congress, and this is based on reporting by the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, that the United States military had successfully degraded Iran's ballistic missile program in recent operations, that American precision strikes had set Iran's capabilities back by, and I'm paraphrasing the language used in those briefings, a meaningful period of time. These two things cannot both be true, and today I'm going to show you which one is closer to reality, and why the gap between them may be the single most consequential intelligence failure in American strategic planning since Vietnam. Right now, every major outlet is asking the same cluster of questions. CNN is asking whether Iran will retaliate and when. Fox News is asking whether Israel should have struck harder and faster. The BBC is asking whether the UN Security Council can convene an emergency session. These are all reasonable questions. They are the questions of people watching the last 24 hours, and they are all the wrong questions. None of them are asking the question that actually determines the outcome of the next 24 months. The right question is this: what does it mean strategically when a country moves its most critical weapons infrastructure so deep inside a mountain that the most sophisticated bunker-busting technology ever built may not be able to reach it? And what does America do when the answer to that question is that it cannot do enough? In the next 20 minutes, I am going to show you the engineering logic behind what Iran built, the specific hard limits of what America can actually destroy, why those limits are more severe than any official briefing will acknowledge publicly, and why the actor positioned to exploit that gap most effectively is the one that never showed up to the fight at all. I want to be direct about something before we go further. This is analytical interpretation built on publicly available reporting, satellite imagery analysis, and declassified or leaked government assessments. I could be wrong at the margins, I have never said this is gospel, but I want you to see the framework, the structural logic, and I want you to check it against the sources yourself, because the mainstream narrative on this story is operating at a level of abstraction that is preventing people from understanding what is actually at stake. What is actually at stake is the question of whether American military superiority, which has been the organizing assumption of global security for 80 years, still applies in this specific domain. That question deserves a direct answer, even if the direct answer is uncomfortable. Okay, let's build the framework. I call this the geology of deterrence. Sounds academic, it isn't. Let me explain it from first principles in the simplest possible way, because once you understand the logic, you will never look at a news headline about an airstrike the same way again. Deterrence in the classical Cold War model worked like this. Both sides had the ability to destroy the other's weapons, and both sides knew it, and that mutual knowledge was the thing that prevented either side from launching first. The weapons were the leverage, but the visibility of those weapons, the fact that each side's missiles sat in silos that could be located, targeted, and destroyed, was actually part of the deterrence architecture. I can destroy your weapons, you can destroy mine, neither of us moves. That is the mutually assured destruction model that defined superpower competition for 40 years. Now ask what happens when one side moves its weapons somewhere the other side literally cannot destroy them with any technology currently in operation or on the near-term horizon. Not cannot destroy them without unacceptable cost. Cannot destroy them, period. The deterrence equation doesn't just shift, it breaks. The side with the invulnerable weapons gains something no Cold War adversary ever fully possessed: the ability to absorb a first strike and still have its retaliatory capability entirely intact. That is not an upgrade to deterrence. That is a transformation of the strategic relationship. The side with the buried weapons doesn't need to launch to win. It wins simply by existing, by making the other side permanently uncertain about whether a strike achieves anything at all. Think about what Thucydides documented in the Peloponnesian War, the moment when Athens built the long walls, the fortifications connecting the city to its port at Piraeus, effectively making siege warfare against Athens pointless. Athens couldn't be starved out anymore, couldn't be cut off. The strategic calculus of every Spartan general changed overnight, not because Athens had better soldiers or more ships, but because it had changed the terrain in a way that made the standard playbook obsolete. Iran has done the equivalent with geology. It has weaponized the Zagros Mountains. And the question for American planners is the same question Spartan generals faced staring at those walls. Now what? There are 5 pieces of evidence that prove Iran's underground missile infrastructure has crossed a threshold that fundamentally limits American military options, 5 structural realities that, taken together, explain why no official American briefing on the success of recent strikes has yet addressed the underground program with specific specificity. 5. Let's go through them in sequence. Number 1, the depth problem, and the hard physics of bunker busting. This is the single most important technical constraint in this entire analysis, so I want to be precise. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, the largest bunker-busting bomb in the American arsenal, a weapon that weighs 30,000 pounds and was specifically designed and developed to address deep underground targets, has a stated penetration capability against reinforced concrete of approximately 60 meters. Some estimates from defense analysts at the Air Force Research Laboratory, and cited in Congressional Research Service assessments, suggest that in optimal conditions against certain soil and rock compositions, that figure can reach somewhat higher. Against the hardest granite and limestone formations of the Zagros Range, credible independent estimates, including from former Pentagon officials who have spoken to publications like War on the Rocks and Foreign Policy, put effective penetration at well under 200 meters. Iran's most sensitive and protected facilities are assessed by American and Israeli intelligence, according to reporting in the New York Times and assessments cited by the International Atomic Energy Agency, to be at depths between 200 and 500 meters. Not 20 meters, not 60 meters. 200 to 500 meters, 200 not 20, 200. The GBU-57 does not reach 200 meters in the geological conditions found in western Iran. That is not a gap that better targeting software closes. That is not a gap that more bombs close. It is a gap that physics imposes and physics does not negotiate. The weapon that America built to solve this problem does not solve this problem. Let that sit for a moment. And here is what makes this limit so strategically significant beyond the physics alone. The GBU-57 was not a cheap or fast program. It was developed over years at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars in research and development precisely because American planners had identified the deep underground bunker as the critical gap in the strike toolkit. Congress funded it. The Air Force integrated it onto the B-2 Spirit, the only platform with the payload capacity to carry it, and the entire program was framed around one scenario, reaching hardened facilities that older penetrators could not touch. That program, that investment, that engineering effort produced a weapon that reaches 60 meters in optimal conditions. Iran built to 250. The counter to that American capability was to build 20 meters deeper than the weapon can reach, then add 100 meters of margin on top of that. Iran did not accidentally build facilities the GBU-57 cannot reach. It studied the weapon's published performance envelope and engineered beyond it on purpose. That is not luck. That is counter-acquisition strategy. America spent the money to build the solution. Iran spent less money to make the solution obsolete before it was deployed. Okay? Number 2, the tunnel architecture, redundancy by design. This is the piece that is almost entirely absent from mainstream coverage, and I want to explain why it matters so much. A single deep bunker, no matter how deep, has a known vulnerability. You can collapse the entrance, cut off the ventilation, sever the access roads, and the facility becomes operationally useless even if you can't destroy what's inside it. Iran's engineers understand this perfectly. According to detailed analysis from the Institute for Science and International Security, the Middlebury Institute's James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, and reporting in Jane's Defense Weekly, Iran's underground military infrastructure is not organized as a set of discrete deep bunkers. It is organized as a network, a system of interconnected tunnels with multiple access points, redundant ventilation systems, dispersed storage nodes, and in the most critical facilities, independent power generation. Think about what that means for a strike planner. You don't have one entrance to collapse, you have 4. You don't have one ventilation system to destroy. You have 3 independent systems feeding the same complex from different surface locations, often kilometers apart. You are not solving a targeting problem. You are solving a topological problem, a network problem. And the network was specifically designed so that no realistic strike package removes enough nodes to disable it. This is the mosaic defense applied underground. There is no single switch to throw. If someone punches you in the face, you don't hit them in the eyes, because the eyes and the face and the brain are all inside a mountain and you can't reach any of them with what you have. Number 3, dispersal and mobility, the weapon that doesn't stay still. Okay, does this make sense so far? Because this third piece is where the picture shifts from difficult to genuinely alarming for planners. Even if we hypothetically resolve the depth problem and the tunnel network problem, even if American technology could somehow reach and disable every hardened underground site that intelligence has positively identified, Iran has spent the last decade specifically addressing the scenario where the fixed sites are destroyed. According to analysis by the International Institute for Strategic Studies and reporting in Defense Intelligence Agency documents cited by Congress, Iran has invested heavily in road-mobile ballistic missile systems. transporter erector launchers, which are mobile platforms that can carry and fire ballistic missiles from essentially any location with an adequate road surface. These systems can be driven out of mountain tunnel complexes, dispersed across the country, moved at night, hidden under civilian infrastructure, and launched within minutes of reaching a firing position. A mobile missile is not a bunker. You cannot fix it on a satellite image taken yesterday and strike it today, because it is not there today. The weapon moves. The target is a ghost. 3 years, not 3 months. Iran has been building and dispersing this mobile force for 3 years at an accelerating pace, and every fixed facility that draws an airstrike is, in part, a decoy for the mobile force that the fixed facility shelters, trains, and maintains. Okay? Number 4. The reconstitution speed problem. Here is something that is almost never discussed in the public analysis of strikes on Iranian infrastructure, and I want to explain it carefully because it changes the entire frame of what success means in this context. Even when a strike is genuinely successful, when it does damage a facility, collapse a tunnel section, destroy a launcher or a missile storage area, the question that determines whether that strike has strategic value is not, was the target hit, but how long before it is replaced. Iran's defense industrial base has been operating under sanctions for over 40 years. This is not a minor detail. 40 years of sanctions have produced a defense industry that is, almost by necessity, indigenously capable in ways that no amount of export controls can now reverse. According to reporting from the Associated Press and analysis from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Iran has demonstrated the ability to reconstitute damaged missile production facilities within months, not years. It has developed indigenous solid fuel production capability, a critical variable, because solid fuel missiles can be stored for extended periods and launched rapidly, unlike the liquid fuel systems that require fueling in the open and therefore create observable targeting windows. When you destroy a solid fuel missile storage facility, Iran builds another one. When you destroy an assembly line, Iran restores it. The engine of replacement is running faster than the engine of destruction. This is not a new problem. This is the core lesson of the air campaign over North Vietnam, where American bombers struck the Hanoi Bridge at Thanh Hoa repeatedly, 67 times according to historical records, and North Vietnamese engineers rebuilt it after every strike within weeks. 67 strikes, one bridge, still standing. McNamara measured the sorties. He forgot to measure the will and the industrial capacity behind the bridge. Number 5, the escalation ceiling. The constraint that isn't about physics. This is the piece that ties everything together and explains why the gap between what American technology can do in theory and what American strategy can execute in practice is even wider than the physics alone would suggest. Even setting aside the depth problem, the tunnel network, the mobile force, and the reconstitution speed, even if all of those were somehow resolved, there is a ceiling on what any military operation against Iran's underground infrastructure can actually attempt, imposed not by geology, but by strategic consequence. Iran's ballistic missile force, buried in those mountains, is the deterrent backstop for the entire regional balance. It is the thing that keeps the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the world's oil supply, moving through 21 miles of water, from being physically contested on Iranian terms. Any strike package that successfully degrades a significant portion of that force triggers the calculation in Tehran about whether the remaining force is sufficient to deter a follow-on strike, and whether the rational response is to use what remains before it is also degraded. This is first strike incentive theory, and it is the reason every serious analyst of this region, including former CENTCOM commanders who have spoken to foreign policy and war on the rocks, is extremely cautious about the logic of partial degradation strikes. A strike that destroys 30% of the buried missile force may produce a more dangerous situation than no strike at all, because the remaining 70% now operates under the threat of further degradation, and the calculus of use it or lose it becomes active. The choke point is not just geographic. It is the loaded gun that the buried missiles aim at the global economy. And a strike that wounds the hand holding that gun without disarming it doesn't make the situation safer, it makes it more volatile. Now, I want to give you the strongest possible argument against everything I've just laid out because intellectual honesty demands it and because this argument is serious enough that dismissing it would be dishonest. The strongest case against my analysis runs as follows. The underground depth and redundancy problem, while real, is not as absolute as I've presented it. American intelligence on the precise depth and layout of Iranian underground facilities is more detailed than what is publicly accessible. Strikes can be sequenced, the same target struck repeatedly, with each strike deepening the penetration of the previous one, collapsing tunnel sections progressively rather than in a single engagement. Furthermore, the underground facilities, while protected, still require surface infrastructure: road access, power connections, ventilation, personnel movement, logistics supply. Surface infrastructure can be struck repeatedly, and the cumulative effect of denying access, power, and resupply to an underground facility can render it operationally unusable without ever needing to penetrate to the depth of the missiles themselves. And finally, cyber and electronic warfare capabilities, which no public analysis can fully assess, may provide the ability to interfere with the systems that control and launch those buried missiles in ways that are invisible to satellite imagery. That is a serious argument. I want to be direct about the fact that it has genuine merit. But here is precisely what that argument cannot explain. It cannot explain why, if sequenced strikes on hardened targets were as effective as suggested, Iran's underground program has expanded continuously for 15 years through multiple American and Israeli strike campaigns on Iranian-affiliated facilities. The sequenced strike theory is not new. It was applied in practice against multiple Iranian facilities across multiple years. The program continued. The depth increased. The network grew. You can observe the output of the strategy directly in the satellite record, and what you observe is that the strategy has not bent the program's trajectory. That is not an argument. That is a data point. It cannot explain the surface denial timeline. Cutting off logistics and power to a sufficiently deep and well-resourced underground facility is a siege, not a strike. A siege requires sustained military presence and the ability to maintain that presence indefinitely over a target set distributed across hundreds of kilometers of Iranian territory. That is not a strike campaign. That is a war of occupation that no coalition has the political will, legal authority, or logistical capacity to execute. And it cannot explain what happens to the global energy market during the months that a siege or sustained degradation campaign would require. The moment Iran's command structure assesses that its buried missile force faces sustained degradation, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the pressure valve, and a closed Strait of Hormuz, even for 72 hours, produces economic consequences that cascade through every allied economy, Europe, Japan, South Korea, India, in ways that would fracture the coalition executing the campaign before the campaign could achieve its objectives. The geology buys Iran time. Time destroys coalitions. Let's bring this together now. What Iran built inside those mountains is not just an engineering achievement, it is a doctrinal statement. It says, we have studied every American and Israeli strike campaign against every adversary over the past 40 years. We have watched what happened to Saddam Hussein's conventional military, destroyed in weeks. We have watched what happened to Muammar Gaddafi's regime when it surrendered its weapons programs and accepted Western assurances, gone within a decade. We have watched what happened to Saddam a second time. We have drawn the only rational conclusion available to a state in our strategic position. The only weapons that reliably deter a superior conventional military power are the weapons that power cannot reach and cannot destroy. Everything else is a bargaining chip. Everything else eventually ends up on a table in Geneva or a courtroom in The Hague. The weapons inside the mountain are the only category that doesn't get bargained away, because they're the only category the other side can't take away by force. The mountain is not a hiding place. The mountain is the strategy. Iran did not bury its missiles because it was afraid. It buried its missiles because burial is the doctrine that makes the missiles matter, and because the entire history of American military intervention in the Middle East over the last 30 years taught Iran exactly one lesson. The countries that gave up their deterrence did not survive. The countries that didn't, did. That lesson, applied to geology and engineering over 2 decades, is what we are looking at on those satellite images. A mountain, a conclusion, and a gap between what America can do and what the situation requires that no official briefing is prepared to name out loud. And the actor who benefits most from that doctrine is, again, not in the room. China has been watching this dynamic develop for 20 years with extraordinary attentiveness, because China's own military planners are building an analogous doctrine in the Pacific. Deep underground facilities for ballistic missile storage on Hainan Island and in Yunnan Province, tunnel networks for submarine operations, dispersed and hardened command and control infrastructure. According to analysis from the Pentagon's annual Military and Security Developments Involving the People's Republic of China report, China has invested enormously in underground basing for its nuclear and conventional missile forces. Every operational lesson Iran demonstrates about the limits of American strike capability against deep underground targets is a lesson China is applying to its own architecture. Every public American acknowledgement that the GBU-57 cannot reach 200 meters in hard granite is a data point China's engineers are building into their facility designs. Iran is running the live fire test for a doctrine that China intends to scale. China is not paying for the test. Iran is. China is reading every result. The patient giant is not just collecting winnings from the cost exchange. It is collecting intelligence, the most valuable intelligence possible, real operational data on the actual limits of American military capability under real-world conditions. Who benefits from knowing exactly where American power ends? The power that intends to test that boundary next. 3 things to watch in the next 48 to 72 hours that will tell you whether this framework is tracking. 1. Watch for any American or Allied official statement that specifies the depth of the facilities targeted in recent operations. If the briefings remain at the level of significant degradation without specifying which facilities and at what depth, if they stay at the level of general claims rather than specific targeting outcomes, that is a strong signal that the deep underground program was not meaningfully engaged. Specificity in military briefings correlates with confidence. Vagueness is the tell. 2. Watch Iranian surface logistics activity around the Zagros range tunnel complexes as identified by commercial satellite providers, particularly Planet Labs and Maxar, whose imagery is publicly available and widely analyzed. If supply convoys, fuel deliveries, and personnel movement to those complexes continue at normal rates in the days following American strikes, the underground infrastructure was not meaningfully disrupted. The mountain tells the truth even when the briefings don't. 3. Watch the oil futures market and specifically Brent crude option pricing at the 30 and 60-day tenors. Professional commodity traders who have no political interest in any official narrative are pricing the probability of Strait of Hormuz disruption in real time. If options prices on crude oil spike, particularly if the volatility premium in longer-dated options rises faster than spot price, that is the market telling you that the people with the most money on the line believe the underground missile force is still operational and the choke point is still at risk. Markets don't have press secretaries. Your homework. I want you to do this specifically. Go to the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies website. It's publicly accessible. And pull their most recent satellite imagery analysis of Iranian underground military construction. Then pull the Congressional Research Service report on the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, which is also publicly available and contains the unclassified penetration performance data. Put those two documents side by side, the depth of what Iran has built against the depth of what America's best bunker buster can reach. Read those numbers against each other. If you think I have overstated the depth gap, if you think I have underestimated the effectiveness of sequence strikes or cyber options, if you think the reconstitution speed argument breaks on evidence I haven't accounted for, prove it in the comments. I want that challenge. I want to be wrong about this. A framework that can't be broken by evidence isn't a framework. It's a bias. Challenge me. So here's the question I want to leave with you. The one that I keep returning to when I look at the satellite imagery of that mountain entrance. Intact, operational, 250 meters of granite above what's inside. If the most powerful military in human history cannot reach the weapons of its adversary, not because it lacks the will, not because it lacks the technology in other domains, but because the adversary found a way to use geology itself as armor, what does the word deterrence actually mean anymore? I'll see you in the next one.